Blake Anderson stared at the medical report in his hands, the words blurring together as his grip tightened, crumpling the edges of the paper. The penthouse suite overlooking Central Park fell silent, save for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, a wedding gift from Eliza's parents. 3 years of marriage and now this. 3 years of planning for a future that would never come. Blake. Eliza's voice trembled as she stood in the doorway, her slender frame almost swallowed by the massive living room. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail and her eyes, those deep amber eyes he'd fallen in love with, were red-rimmed and puffy. Please say something. But Blake couldn't find the words. The Anderson legacy, generations of successful businessmen who had built their fortune from nothing, would end with him. No son to carry on the family name. No heir to take over Anderson Developments, the real estate empire he had expanded tenfold since his father passed it down to him. I need some air, he muttered, brushing past her and grabbing his coat from the closet. He ignored the pain flashing across her face, the outstretched hand that fell limply to her side as he slammed the door behind him. New York City buzzed around him as he walked aimlessly, his mind replaying the doctor's words. I'm sorry, Mrs. Anderson, but the chances of you conceiving naturally are extremely low. The damage from your childhood illness has affected your reproductive system significantly. Blake had always been clear about what he wanted in life. Success, legacy, family. He checked off the first 2 boxes with ease, his natural business acumen and ruthless determination making him one of the youngest real estate moguls in the city. Finding Eliza had been the final piece, a beautiful, intelligent woman from a good family who shared his dream of having children. Or so he thought. If you're enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more compelling content like this. Your support means everything to us. The weeks following the diagnosis were filled with strained silences and separate bedrooms. Blake buried himself in work, staying at the office until midnight, while Eliza researched alternatives. Adoption, surrogacy, experimental treatments. She'd leave articles and brochures around the penthouse, but they remained untouched, collecting dust. We need to talk about this, Eliza finally said one evening, cornering him in his home office. There are options, Blake. Just because I can't carry a child doesn't mean we can't have a family. Blake looked up from his laptop, his face hardened into the same expression he used when negotiating multi-million-dollar deals. It's not the same. What's not the same? Well, commitment? Being parents to a child who needs us. Eliza's voice rose slightly, and Blake noticed a fire in her eyes that had been absent for weeks. Or is it just that you won't get to see a mini version of yourself running around boosting your ego? Her words stung with an uncomfortable truth. Blake had always imagined a son with his blue eyes and strong jaw, a daughter with his business sense and determination. A biological continuation of himself and his family line. You knew how important this was to me, he said coldly. Having children, my own children, was always part of the plan. The plan? Eliza's laugh was hollow, bordering on hysterical. I'm sorry my body didn't follow your perfect plan, Blake. I'm sorry I'm defective. That's not what I meant. Isn't it though? Tears streamed down her face now. I've seen how you look at me since we got the news. Like I've failed you. Like I'm worth less now. Blake turned away, unable to meet her gaze because she wasn't entirely wrong. Something had changed when he learned she couldn't have children. The future he'd mapped out was dissolving before his eyes, and he couldn't help but resent her for it, even though the rational part of his brain knew it wasn't her fault. I think we should consider our options, he said finally, his voice detached and businesslike. Our options. Eliza echoed, suddenly very still. For moving forward. Blake swiveled his chair to face the window, looking out at the glittering city skyline rather than at his wife's devastated expression. Separately. The word hung in the air between them, heavy and irreversible. If you're enjoying this emotional journey, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories that touch the heart. Share in the comments if you've ever had to overcome a personal challenge in a relationship. Summer turned to fall, and fall to winter as divorce proceedings began. Blake approached the dissolution of his marriage with the same efficiency he applied to business deals. Eliza would be well provided for. He wasn't cruel, just determined to restart his life with someone who could give him what he wanted. Someone who could complete his vision of success. Their friends were shocked. Blake and Eliza had been the perfect couple. Young, successful, beautiful. They didn't know about the diagnosis, about Blake's rigid expectations, about the growing chasm that had formed between husband and wife. To the outside world, the breakup seemed sudden and inexplicable. You're making a mistake, Marcus, Blake's oldest friend and business partner, told him over drinks at their regular bar. Eliza is 1 in a million. You really want to throw away your marriage over this? Blake swirled the scotch in his glass, the amber liquid reminiscent of Eliza's eyes. You wouldn't understand. Try me. Marcus leaned forward, his normally jovial face uncharacteristically serious. Because from where I'm sitting, you're walking away from a woman who loves you, really loves you, because she can't do something beyond her control. It's more complicated than that. Is it? Or are you just so obsessed with this perfect life you've mapped out that you can't see what's right in front of you? Blake glared at his friend. Easy for you to say. You've never wanted kids. No, but I've wanted love. Real love. The kind that sticks around when life gets messy. Marcus shook his head. Most people spend their whole lives looking for what you and Eliza have. But you're too blinded by your own ego to see it. Blake downed the rest of his scotch in one burning gulp and stood up. I didn't ask for your opinion. No, you didn't. But someone needs to tell you that you're acting like your father. The comparison hit Blake like a physical blow. Howard Anderson had been brilliant in business but cold and calculating in his personal life. A man who measured people's worth by what they could provide him. Blake had sworn he would never become like that. But as he walked home through the snowy Manhattan streets, Blake couldn't shake the uncomfortable feeling that perhaps Marcus was right. Was he reducing Eliza to her inability to bear children? Was he really becoming the man he had promised himself he would never be? The doubt was short-lived. By the time he reached his penthouse, now devoid of Eliza's touches, her books, her favorite throw pillows, the scent of her perfume, Blake had convinced himself again that he was making the right choice. He was still young, just 34. He had time to find someone else, to start over, to have the family he had always envisioned. The divorce was finalized in January, 6 months after the diagnosis that had shattered their world. Blake didn't attend the final hearing, sending his lawyer instead. The last time he saw Eliza was when she came to collect the last of her things from the penthouse, looking thin and pale but holding her head high. I hope you find what you're looking for, Blake, she said softly as she stood at the door, a small box of personal items in her arms. There was no bitterness in her voice, only a profound sadness that made Blake's chest tighten. I really do. Before he could respond, she was gone, the door closing with a quiet click that somehow sounded more final than any slam could have. Blake threw himself into work after the divorce, expanding Anderson Developments aggressively. New buildings rose across the city bearing his name, his fortune doubled, and business magazines hailed him as a visionary. He dated casually, beautiful, accomplished women who could potentially fit the role of future Mrs. Anderson and mother to his children, but none of them held his interest for long. If you've been moved by Blake and Eliza's story so far, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement helps us continue bringing you these powerful stories that reflect real human experiences. 2 years after the divorce, Blake met Vanessa Hamilton at a charity gala. Tall, blonde, and impeccably connected to New York's elite, she seemed perfect on paper. She came from old money, had graduated from an Ivy League school, and made it clear early in their relationship that she wanted children. Preferably 2, a boy and a girl, spaced exactly 3 years apart. I've always known exactly what I wanted, she told Blake on their third date, reaching across the table at the exclusive restaurant to take his hand. And I think you and I want the same things. Blake should have been thrilled. Vanessa was the embodiment of everything he'd been looking for since ending his marriage to Eliza. Yet as their relationship progressed, he found himself making comparisons he knew were unfair. Vanessa didn't read the same books Eliza had loved. She didn't laugh at his dry jokes the way Eliza had, with her whole body. She didn't challenge him or push him to be better. But she could give him children. She could ensure the Anderson legacy continued. And wasn't that what mattered most? He proposed to Vanessa on a private yacht in the Mediterranean, presenting her with a ring that cost 3 times what he'd given Eliza. The photos appeared in society pages, and congratulations poured in from business associates and friends. Only Marcus remained silent, his disapproval evident in his absence. As Blake and Vanessa began planning their lavish wedding, scheduled for the following spring, Blake found himself inexplicably thinking of Eliza more and more often. He wondered where she was, what she was doing, if she had found happiness after him. Occasionally he would hear snippets about her through mutual friends. She had moved to Boston, she was working for a non-profit organization, she seemed to be doing well. Good for her, he would think, pushing down the strange hollowness that accompanied these updates. He had moved on. He was building the future he had always wanted. But late at night, when Vanessa slept beside him in his king-sized bed, Blake would sometimes find himself staring at the ceiling, remembering how Eliza used to curl against him, her head on his chest, her breathing synced with his own. In those quiet moments, doubt would creep in, whispering questions he didn't want to answer. Had he made a terrible mistake? Was what he had with Vanessa real, or just a carefully constructed arrangement to fulfill his life plan? And the most disturbing question of all, had he ever really loved Eliza for who she was, or only for what he expected her to give him? 6 months before his wedding to Vanessa, Blake's world shifted on its axis again. His mother, Eleanor Anderson, suffered a severe stroke. The woman who had always been a pillar of strength, who had balanced his father's coldness with her warmth, who had taught Blake about compassion when Howard Anderson had only preached ambition, was suddenly frail and vulnerable in a hospital bed. She stabilized, but the damage was extensive, the neurologist explained as Blake stood at his mother's bedside, watching her chest rise and fall with each shallow breath. She'll need extensive rehabilitation, and even then she may not recover fully. She'll likely need full-time care. Blake nodded numbly, his mind racing. His mother lived alone in the family's old mansion in Connecticut since his father's death 5 years ago. She had always insisted on maintaining her independence, refusing Blake's offers to move her into the city or hire full-time help. "I'll arrange for the best care," Blake assured the doctor, already mentally calculating what steps needed to be taken. Private nurses, home modifications, the best rehabilitation specialists money could buy, his mother would want for nothing. But as the weeks passed, it became clear that Eleanor Anderson's recovery would be complicated by more than just physical limitations. Her once sharp mind had been affected by the stroke, leaving her confused and sometimes struggling to recognize even Blake. The sprawling mansion that had been her home for 40 years now seemed to disorient her, its grand staircases and multiple rooms becoming a labyrinth she couldn't navigate. "She needs a more controlled environment," her primary physician advised during a follow-up visit. "Somewhere smaller, more manageable, with round-the-clock professional care." Blake resisted at first. His mother had always been adamant about staying in her home. "I'll die in this house, Blake, just like your father did," she had told him countless times. But watching her struggles, the frustration in her eyes when she couldn't remember where she was, the tears when she tried and failed to perform simple tasks, he knew changes had to be made. If you're finding this story moving, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more content that explores complex human relationships. Drop a comment about a time when you had to make a difficult decision for someone you love. The process of researching care facilities opened Blake's eyes to a world he had never given much thought to before. He visited dozens of places, from sterile, hospital-like institutions to upscale communities that resembled luxury resorts more than medical facilities. None of them felt right. None of them felt like places his proud, dignified mother belonged. It was during one such visit to a highly recommended facility in Manhattan that fate intervened. Blake was sitting in the administrative office, asking pointed questions about staff qualifications and patient-to-caregiver ratios, when a familiar voice floated through the open door. "Mrs. Patterson, remember to take your medication after lunch, not before. We don't want you getting drowsy during your grandson's visit." The voice was warm, patient, and unmistakable. Blake's heart stuttered in his chest as he turned toward the door, already knowing who he would see. Eliza. She stood just outside the office, talking gently to an elderly woman in a wheelchair. Her hair was shorter now, falling just below her shoulders, and she wore a simple blue dress under a white lab coat. She looked different somehow, more confident, more self-assured, but her smile was exactly as he remembered it, reaching all the way to those amber eyes. "Mr. Anderson?" The facility director's voice snapped Blake back to the present. "Do you have any other questions?" Blake cleared his throat, suddenly aware that his palms were sweating. "No, thank you. I'll be in touch." He stood up abruptly, gathering his coat and briefcase, his mind racing. Should he say hello? Would she even want to see him after how things had ended? Before he could decide, the choice was made for him. As he stepped out of the office, Eliza turned and their eyes met. Time seemed to freeze. The busy hallway, the sounds of the facility, everything faded into the background as they stared at each other across 3 years of silence and the wreckage of their marriage. Recognition, surprise, and something else, something Blake couldn't quite identify, flashed across Eliza's face. She excused herself from the elderly woman and approached him, her steps measured and deliberate. "Blake," she said simply, her voice neither warm nor cold, just politely professional. "I didn't expect to see you here. My mother had a stroke," he explained, the words feeling inadequate. "I'm looking for a place for her to recover." Concern immediately softened Eliza's features. She had always been fond of Eleanor and the feeling had been mutual. "I'm so sorry to hear that. How severe was it?" "Bad enough. She's not the same." Blake was surprised at how the emotion caught in his throat. He rarely showed vulnerability to anyone, but something about seeing Eliza again broke through his carefully constructed walls. "I work here now," Eliza said, gesturing to her surroundings. "I'm the director of therapeutic programs. After everything I went back to school. Got my master's in gerontology." That's impressive," Blake said genuinely. Eliza had always talked about going back to school someday, but during their marriage she had put those plans on hold to support his career, to prepare for the family they had planned to have. An awkward silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and shared memories. "Would you like to see what we do here?" Eliza finally asked, her professional demeanor returning. "Since you're considering this place for Eleanor, we have some innovative programs that might help with her recovery." Blake hesitated only for a moment before nodding. "I'd like that. If you're enjoying this emotional reunion, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share your thoughts in the comments about whether you think Blake and Eliza will reconnect or if too much damage has been done." The tour was unlike any of the others Blake had experienced. Eliza didn't focus on the expensive amenities or the prestigious medical staff like other facilities had. Instead, she showed him the art therapy room where residents created vibrant paintings despite physical limitations, the garden where they grew vegetables and flowers, the common areas designed to encourage socialization and mental stimulation. "Our philosophy is that aging and recovery shouldn't mean losing your identity or purpose," Eliza explained as they walked through a bright solarium where elderly residents tended to potted plants. "Everyone here has a role, a contribution to make, no matter their limitations." Blake watched her as she spoke, noting how her eyes lit up, how her hands moved animatedly. This was a different Eliza than the one he had left. More passionate, more purposeful. She had found her calling, and it showed in every interaction she had with the residents, all of whom clearly adored her. "Mrs. Abernathy was a concert pianist," Eliza continued, introducing Blake to a tiny woman with gnarled, arthritic hands. "She teaches music appreciation now. Mr. Gonzalez was a high school principal. He leads our book club. Everyone has value, everyone has something to offer." The word struck Blake with unexpected force. Everyone has value. Had he forgotten that fundamental truth? Had he reduced Eliza, reduced their marriage, to a single function, discarding everything else that made her who she was? At the end of the tour, they stood awkwardly in the facility's lobby. Blake had 1,000 questions he wanted to ask, 1,000 things he wanted to say, but none of them seemed right. "Thank you," he said instead. "This place is different. In a good way." Eliza nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. "We think so too. Would you?" Blake hesitated, then forged ahead. "Would you have time for a coffee sometime? To talk about my mother's case more specifically?" Something flickered in Eliza's eyes, caution, perhaps, or wariness. "I don't think that would be appropriate, Blake. I can connect you with our admissions team if you decide this is the right place for Eleanor." Her rejection was gentle but firm, and Blake felt it like a physical pain. What had he expected? That she would welcome him back into her life with open arms after he had discarded her when she no longer fit into his perfect plan? "Of course," he nodded, trying to mask his disappointment. "I understand." Blake left the facility with a thick packet of information and a heaviness in his chest that had nothing to do with his mother's condition. Seeing Eliza again, seeing her thriving, purposeful, making a difference in people's lives, had stirred feelings he thought he had neatly packed away. Back in his luxury apartment, Blake found Vanessa reviewing wedding invitation samples, her laptop open to a Pinterest board filled with extravagant flower arrangements and table settings. "Blake, darling, perfect timing. What do you think of these?" She held up 2 nearly identical cream-colored cards with ornate gold lettering. "The Hendersons used this style for their daughter's wedding last year, but I think we could do something even more impressive." Blake stared at the invitations, suddenly unable to conjure up even a pretense of interest. His mind was still back at the care facility, still with Eliza as she gently guided an elderly man through a physical therapy exercise, her patience and kindness evident in every movement. "Blake." Vanessa's voice sharpened slightly. "Are you listening?" "Sorry, it's been a long day," he murmured, loosening his tie. "My mother's situation is complicated." Vanessa's expression softened marginally. "I'm sure it is. But we really need to finalize these invitations this week if we want them to go out on schedule." And we still haven't confirmed the final guest count for the Hamptons' engagement party next month. Blake nodded absently, pouring himself a scotch from the crystal decanter on the bar cart. Whatever you think is best. As Vanessa launched into a detailed explanation of why one invitation style was superior to the other, Blake found himself completely detached from the conversation. Was this what his life would be? Expensive parties, superficial decisions, discussions that never went deeper than appearances? He thought of Eliza again, of the passion in her voice as she described helping residents reconnect with their sense of purpose. When had he last felt that kind of genuine enthusiasm? When had any conversation with Vanessa moved him the way a 15-minute tour with Eliza had? If you're enjoying this story of rediscovery and reflection, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel. We'd love to hear your predictions about what will happen next in the comments section below. Despite his reservations, Blake ultimately decided to place his mother at Eliza's facility. It wasn't just because of Eliza, though he couldn't deny she was a factor. It was because none of the other places he visited seemed to see their residents as whole people rather than just patients to be managed. Eleanor moved in 2 weeks later, and Blake made sure to schedule the admission during hours when he knew Eliza would be off duty, according to the staff schedule he had discreetly obtained. He wasn't ready for another encounter, not until he had sorted through the confusing tangle of emotions their first meeting had stirred up. But life rarely follows our careful plans. As Blake was setting up family photos in his mother's new room, trying to make the space feel more personal, a soft knock sounded at the open door. "I heard Mrs. Anderson was joining us today," Eliza said, stepping into the room with a small potted orchid in her hands. "I wanted to welcome her personally." Eleanor, who had been sitting quietly in an armchair by the window, looked up at the sound of Eliza's voice. For a moment, her eyes clouded with confusion, then suddenly cleared with recognition. "Eliza? Eliza, my dear girl?" To Blake's astonishment, his mother's face lit up with more animation than he had seen since before her stroke. She extended a trembling hand toward Eliza, who immediately crossed the room to take it in her own. "Hello, Eleanor," Eliza said warmly, crouching down to eye level with the older woman. "I brought you an orchid. I remember how much you loved the ones in your greenhouse." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "You remember my orchids?" "Of course I do. You showed me how to care for them, remember? You said they need patience and attention just like the important relationships in our lives." Blake stood frozen watching this exchange. His mother, who often struggled to recognize even him these days, not only knew Eliza immediately but remembered shared moments from years ago. And Eliza, despite everything that had happened with their marriage, was treating Eleanor with genuine affection, not a hint of resentment for being Blake's mother. "Blake," Eleanor said suddenly, turning to her son with unexpected clarity in her eyes. "Blake, Eliza is here. Have you seen her? Isn't it wonderful?" Blake cleared his throat, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Yes, mother. It's wonderful." The three of them fell into a strange, gentle conversation, with Eleanor sometimes drifting into confusion but always finding her way back when Eliza gently redirected her. Blake said little, content to observe the natural way Eliza interacted with his mother, the genuine care in her every gesture. When it was time for Eleanor to attend her first group activity, an aide came to escort her, leaving Blake and Eliza alone in the room. "Thank you," Blake said simply, "for being kind to her. You didn't have to be." Eliza adjusted one of the photo frames on Eleanor's dresser. A picture from Blake and Eliza's wedding day, Blake realized with a jolt. Eleanor must have insisted on bringing it. "Your mother was never anything but good to me," Eliza replied. "What happened between us has nothing to do with how I feel about her." The implication hung in the air. "Unlike you, I don't discard people when they no longer serve my purpose." "Eliza, about what happened?" She held up a hand, stopping him. "Don't. Please. It's in the past and that's where it should stay." But was it really in the past? The way his heart had raced when he saw her again, the way he had been comparing Vanessa to her ever since, the growing certainty that he had made the biggest mistake of his life, none of that felt like the past. "I'm engaged," he blurted out, immediately regretting the words as hurt flashed across Eliza's face before she could mask it. "Congratulations," she said evenly. "I hope you'll be very happy." I didn't mean," Blake ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I just thought you should know. It's been 3 years, Blake. Did you think I was sitting around waiting for you to come back?" There was an edge to her voice now, the professional veneer cracking slightly. "No, of course not. I should get back to work," Eliza interrupted, moving toward the door. "Your mother will be in good hands here." If you have any concerns about her care, you can speak with Dr. Ramirez or any of our administrative staff. And then she was gone, leaving Blake standing alone in his mother's room, surrounded by photographs of a family that no longer existed in the same way. Over the next several weeks, Blake found himself visiting the facility more and more frequently. He told himself it was for his mother's benefit, and partly it was. Eleanor was responding well to the programs, showing small but significant improvements in her cognitive function and mood. But Blake couldn't deny that he was also hoping for glimpses of Eliza, for chances to see her in her element, doing work that clearly fulfilled her. Sometimes they would exchange brief greetings in the hallway or give each other polite nods across the dining room. Occasionally they would both be present for meetings about Eleanor's care plan, sitting on opposite sides of the conference table while specialists discussed progress and goals. Always, Blake found his eyes drawn to Eliza, noting the confidence with which she spoke, the respect she commanded from her colleagues, the genuine concern she showed for every resident, not just his mother. Meanwhile, his relationship with Vanessa began to show cracks. She had visited the facility exactly once, spending the entire time checking her watch and wrinkling her nose at the institutional smell. She couldn't understand why Blake insisted on being so involved in his mother's care. "That's what we're paying the staff for, darling," she said one evening when Blake canceled dinner plans to attend a family support group at the facility. "And the wedding is only 4 months away now. There's still so much to do." "This is important, Vanessa," Blake replied, his patience wearing thin. "My mother needs me. And I need you too. The Aldridge's gala is tonight and everyone who matters will be there. How will it look if you're not by my side?" The question hung in the air, revealing the fundamental disconnect between them. How will it look? Not how will you feel or how will I feel, but how will it appear to others? "I guess we'll find out," Blake said, grabbing his keys and heading for the door. If you're enjoying this video and want more content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way you won't miss out on any of the amazing stories we have coming up. Your support really helps the channel grow and keeps us bringing you more of what you love. Thank you. The argument with Vanessa that night was the first of many. As summer turned to fall, the tension between them grew. Blake found himself increasingly distracted during wedding planning sessions, his mind drifting to the care facility, to his mother's progress, to Eliza's smile when a resident mastered a new skill in one of her therapy programs. "You're not even listening to me," Vanessa snapped one evening, slamming shut the wedding planner binder. "What is going on with you lately?" Blake looked at her across the expansive living room of his penthouse, realizing with startling clarity that he felt like a stranger in his own home. Or perhaps more accurately, that Vanessa was the stranger, this beautiful, accomplished woman who checked all the right boxes but who had never truly touched his heart. "I'm sorry," he said, the words automatic and hollow. "I've had a lot on my mind." "It's more than that." Vanessa's perfectly manicured nails tapped against the marble countertop. "Ever since your mother went into that facility, you've been different. Distant. Preoccupied." Blake couldn't deny it. His priorities had shifted seismically in the past months. The corporate acquisitions and high-profile social events that had once been the center of his universe now seemed trivial compared to the small victories at the care facility. His mother remembering a long-forgotten family story, an elderly veteran taking his first unassisted steps since his stroke, the community garden harvest festival where residents had proudly displayed vegetables they had grown themselves. And at the center of all those moments had been Eliza, her compassion and vision transforming what could have been merely a place of illness and decline into a community of dignity and purpose. "I think we need to talk," Blake said finally, the weight of the impending conversation settling heavily on his shoulders. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "About the wedding? I told you if you just make decisions when I ask you to, we wouldn't be behind schedule." "Not about the wedding. About us." The shift in the room was palpable, as if all the oxygen had been suddenly sucked out. Vanessa stared at him, her expression cycling through confusion, realization, and finally, anger. "This is about her, isn't it?" Her voice was dangerously quiet. "Your ex-wife. The one who works at your mother's facility." Blake hadn't mentioned Eliza to Vanessa, hadn't told her about their history or their recent encounters. But Vanessa was nothing if not observant, and she had likely pieced it together from the changes in his behavior, perhaps from something his mother had said during her one brief visit. "It's about a lot of things," Blake replied carefully. "About realizing that I've been building my life around the wrong priorities." "The wrong priorities?" Vanessa laughed, a brittle sound without humor. "When we met, you said you wanted someone who understood ambition, who wanted the same things you did, success, status, a family with the right pedigree. Were those the wrong priorities then, or only now that she's back in the picture? The accusation stung because it contained a kernel of truth. Blake had sought out someone like Vanessa deliberately after his divorce, someone who wouldn't challenge his worldview or make him question his choices the way Eliza always had. "I've changed," he said simply. "What I thought I wanted, it doesn't feel right anymore." The engagement ended that night in a storm of tears and recriminations. Vanessa left, taking her wedding planner and her carefully curated vision of their future with her, leaving Blake alone in his penthouse that suddenly seemed too large, too empty, too sterile. If you're enjoying this story of personal transformation, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more meaningful content. Share your thoughts in the comments about times when your own priorities have shifted unexpectedly. The following morning, Blake awoke with a strange sense of lightness despite the difficult conversation with Vanessa. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time since his divorce from Eliza, he felt as if he could breathe fully without the weight of expectations, both external and self-imposed, crushing his chest. He arrived at the care facility earlier than usual, intending to spend time with his mother before her morning therapy session. As he walked through the entrance, he noticed unusual activity in the community room, staff members hanging colorful decorations, residents helping to arrange chairs in a circle, a table being set up with refreshments. "What's happening today?" he asked one of the aides he had come to know during his frequent visits. "Oh, Mr. Anderson. It's adoption day," the young woman replied with a bright smile. "Once a month, we partner with the local animal shelter to bring in senior pets for our residents to interact with. Some of the animals even get adopted by family members who want to give their loved ones here a companion." Blake nodded, vaguely remembering seeing this program listed on the activities calendar. As he turned toward the hallway that led to his mother's room, a familiar voice made him pause. "The carrier goes over there, near the window. We want to make sure the cats have a quiet space if they get overwhelmed." Eliza stood in the center of the room, clipboard in hand, directing volunteers. She wore a casual blue sweater and jeans instead of her usual professional attire, and her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. Even in this relaxed state, or perhaps especially so, she radiated a quiet confidence and purpose that drew Blake's gaze like a magnet. As if sensing his presence, Eliza looked up, their eyes meeting across the bustling room. For a moment, her professional mask slipped, and something soft and vulnerable passed across her face before she quickly composed herself and gave him a polite nod. "Blake." She approached him, maintaining a careful distance. "You're early today. I wanted to spend some time with my mother before her therapy." He gestured to the activity around them. "But this looks interesting." "It's one of our most popular programs," Eliza said, a hint of pride creeping into her voice. "The interaction with the animals reduces stress and anxiety, improves mood, even lowers blood pressure in many residents. And the animals benefit too. Many of these pets have been in the shelter for months because people prefer to adopt younger animals." "Older animals have trouble finding homes?" Blake asked, genuinely curious. Eliza nodded. "People want puppies and kittens. They overlook the older pets, even though they often have so much love to give." She paused, and Blake could almost see her deciding whether to continue. "They get discarded when they're no longer what someone wants, when they don't fit the perfect image of what a pet should be." The parallel was unmistakable, and Blake felt the weight of it settle in his chest. That's terrible." "It is," Eliza agreed quietly. "But that's why programs like this are so important. They remind everyone that value doesn't diminish with age or capability. That worthiness isn't dependent on meeting someone else's expectations." Before Blake could respond, a volunteer approached with a question about the setup, and Eliza excused herself, leaving him standing alone with the uncomfortable weight of her words, and all they implied about their past, pressing down on him. He found his mother in her room, already dressed and sitting in her favorite chair by the window. To his surprise, she was alert and animated, clearly excited about something. "Blake, you're here?" she greeted him, her eyes clearer than they had been in weeks. "Did you know it's adoption day?" "Eliza promised I could meet the golden retriever first. She says he's 7 years old, just like my Maxwell was when your father and I got married." Maxwell. Blake had almost forgotten his childhood dog, a loyal golden retriever who had been his constant companion until the animal's peaceful death when Blake was in high school. His mother had been devastated, refusing to get another dog despite his father's offers to buy her the finest purebred money could buy. "I didn't know you'd been talking to Eliza about Maxwell," Blake said, settling into the chair beside his mother. Eleanor's face softened with a smile. Oh, we talk about many things, Blake. She visits me every day, you know. Even on her days off sometimes. She brings me books and helps me with my memory exercises. She reached out, patting his hand with her gnarled fingers. She's such a special girl. I always thought so. Blake's throat tightened. I didn't know she visited you so often. Of course she does. She cares about people, Blake. Really cares. There was a sharpness in his mother's voice that had been absent since her stroke, a flash of the formidable woman she had once been. Not everyone does, you know. Some people only care about what others can do for them. The words hit Blake like a physical blow. Had his mother always seen this truth about him, about the way he approached relationships? Had she recognized in him the same calculating nature that had made his father successful in business but cold in his personal life? Mom, It's adoption day, Eleanor interrupted, her train of thought shifting as it often did now. We should go to the community room. Eliza will be waiting. If you're moved by this story of personal growth and redemption, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support means everything to us, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments about second chances and changing priorities. The community room had transformed in the short time since Blake had passed by earlier. Residents now filled the chairs arranged in a circle, many accompanied by family members. In the center, volunteers from the animal shelter were setting up pet carriers and small enclosures where the animals could safely interact with the residents. Blake helped his mother find a seat near the front, nodding to familiar faces, both staff and residents he had come to know during his frequent visits. He spotted Eliza across the room, kneeling beside an elderly man in a wheelchair, showing him a small orange kitten that fit in the palm of her hand. The event began with a brief introduction from the shelter director, followed by Eliza explaining the health benefits of animal companionship for seniors. As she spoke, Blake was struck by how naturally she commanded the room, how genuinely the residents responded to her, how much respect she had clearly earned from everyone present. Many of us know what it's like to feel overlooked or undervalued because of age or health challenges, Eliza said, her gaze sweeping across the room, briefly meeting Blake's before moving on. These animals understand that too. They've been waiting for someone to see their worth beyond their gray muzzles or special needs. Today is about making connections that benefit everyone involved, proving that family can be found in unexpected places and can take many different forms. Family can be found in unexpected places. The words resonated deeply with Blake as he watched the careful way the shelter volunteers introduced each animal to the residents. Some seniors were tentative at first, while others reached out eagerly. His mother was among the latter, her face lighting up as a gentle golden retriever was brought to her, its muzzle gray but its eyes bright and alert. "Oh, he's perfect," Eleanor whispered, carefully stroking the dog's soft head. "Just perfect." Throughout the event, Blake found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Eliza as she moved through the room, helping with introductions, taking photos for the facility's newsletter, making sure every resident had a chance to interact with the animals. She was in her element here, fulfilling a purpose that clearly brought her joy. When was the last time he had felt that kind of genuine fulfillment? The satisfaction of closing a business deal, of seeing his name on another building, that was gratification perhaps, but not the deep contentment he could see radiating from Eliza. As the event wound down, Blake approached one of the shelter volunteers, a young woman with a clipboard who was tracking which animals had received adoption interest. "The golden retriever that was with my mother," he said. "Has anyone expressed interest in adopting him?" The volunteer checked her list. "Not yet. Older dogs are always harder to place, especially ones like Cooper who has some arthritis issues. He needs daily medication and probably can't do stairs anymore." Blake nodded, making a quick decision. "I'd like to adopt him. For my mother. She won't be able to care for him herself, but I can bring him for visits, and when she's better, maybe he can live with her again." The volunteer's face brightened. "That would be wonderful. Cooper is such a sweetheart. He deserves a good home." As Blake filled out the adoption paperwork, he was acutely aware of Eliza watching from across the room, her expression unreadable. When he finished, he made his way back to his mother, who was still petting the golden retriever with a contentment he hadn't seen on her face in months. "Mom," he said, crouching beside her chair, "how would you feel about Cooper becoming part of our family? I can bring him to visit you regularly and maybe someday when you're stronger." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Blake, you mean it? You'd do that?" "Of course," he said, surprised by the emotion in his own voice. "I want you to be happy." His mother reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she touched his cheek. "You're so much like your father in many ways, Blake. The drive, the ambition. But I've always hoped you'd have more of me in you too. The part that understands that success isn't just about what you build or what you own. It's about who you love and how well you love them. Blake covered her hand with his own, his throat tight. I'm trying to understand that now, Mom. I really am. After the event, as residents were escorted back to their rooms and shelter volunteers packed up the remaining animals, Blake found himself alone with Eliza in the community room, both of them collecting discarded cups and napkins. That was a successful event, he said, breaking the silence between them. Everyone seemed to really enjoy it. Eliza nodded, carefully folding a tablecloth. It's one of our most popular programs. The residents talk about it for weeks afterward. I adopted the golden retriever, Blake said. For my mother. I thought I could bring him to visit her regularly. Eliza paused, looking at him with surprise. That's thoughtful of you, Blake. Your mother was very attached to him already. She said you visit her often. Even on your days off. Blake set down the trash bag he was holding. You didn't have to do that. I know I didn't have to. Eliza's voice was soft but firm. I wanted to. That's the difference, Blake. That's always been the difference between how we see the world. The truth of her words hit him with full force. While he had always calculated relationships in terms of what they could provide or how they fit into his plans, Eliza gave freely, without conditions or expectations. I ended my engagement, he said abruptly. With Vanessa. It's over. Eliza froze, her hands stilling on the tablecloth. Why are you telling me this? Because. Blake struggled to find the right words, to articulate the profound shift that had occurred within him over the past months. Because I was wrong, Eliza. About so many things. About what matters. About what makes a life worth living. Her expression was carefully neutral, giving away nothing. It took you long enough to figure that out. I know. Believe me, I know. Blake took a tentative step toward her. When we were married, I thought I knew exactly what I wanted, what would make me happy. A certain kind of success, a certain kind of family. I was so focused on checking those boxes that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. Couldn't see you, really see you, for who you are and all you had to give. And now? Eliza asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Now I see what I threw away. Not just a woman who could have given me children, but a partner who challenged me to be better, who saw the world with more compassion and wisdom than I ever did. Someone whose love wasn't conditional on what I could provide or what role I could fill. Eliza was silent for a long moment, her eyes searching his face as if looking for any sign of insincerity. People don't change overnight, Blake. The man who walked away from our marriage because I couldn't give him children, that man is still part of you. Yes, Blake admitted, the hardest truth of all. He is. I can't erase who I was or the choices I made. But I'm trying to be different now. To see differently. To understand that family isn't just about biology or legacy. It's about how we care for each other, how we show up for each other, how we recognize each other's worth beyond what we can give or do. If this story has touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We'd love to hear in the comments if you've ever experienced a profound shift in your understanding of what really matters in life. Eliza's professional demeanor finally cracked, raw emotion filling her eyes. Do you have any idea how much it hurt? To be reduced to one function? To have everything else about me, everything I am, everything we built together, discarded because my body couldn't do what you wanted? I can't imagine, Blake said honestly, the full weight of his cruelty finally settling on him. I was selfish and narrow-minded. I was my father's son in all the worst ways. And I've regretted it every day since. Regret isn't enough, Blake. I know. He met her gaze steadily. I'm not asking for anything, Eliza. I don't expect forgiveness or a second chance. I just wanted you to know that you changed me. Seeing you here, doing this work, loving these people for who they are, not what they can be or do, it's opened my eyes to what real love looks like. What family really means. A tear slipped down Eliza's cheek and she brushed it away quickly. I have to finish cleaning up here. Let me help, Blake offered, understanding her need for space, for time to process his words. They worked in silence, restoring the community room to order, each lost in their own thoughts. When they finished, Eliza gathered her things, pausing at the door. Cooper needs to be picked up from the shelter tomorrow, she said, not quite looking at Blake. They close at 5. I'll be there, he promised. Your mother has art therapy at 3, Eliza continued, her voice carefully neutral. She's been working on a landscape painting. She might like it if you came to see her progress. I'll be there for that too. Eliza nodded, finally meeting his eyes. Good. That's good. She hesitated, then added softly, I'm having lunch in the garden around noon. If you wanted to join me. To talk more about your mother's care plan. The smallest invitation, offered tentatively, cautiously. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but a tiny opening. A chance to start again differently this time. I'd like that, Blake said simply. Eliza gave him one last look before turning to leave. Just so we're clear, I'm not promising anything, Blake. This isn't some fairy tale where everything is suddenly fixed because you've seen the error of your ways. I understand, he assured her. One day at a time. One day at a time, she echoed, a ghost of a smile touching her lips before she walked away. Blake stood alone in the empty community room, feeling both lighter and more grounded than he had in years. His life had veered dramatically from the carefully plotted course he had set for himself. No lavish wedding on the horizon, no biological children to carry on the Anderson name, no perfectly curated wife to complete his image of success. Instead, he had a mother who needed him, an aging golden retriever with arthritic hips, and the faintest possibility of rebuilding something with a woman who had every reason to hate him but instead had shown him a different way to measure the value of a life. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether lunch in the garden would lead to anything more than conversation about his mother's care, whether Eliza could ever truly forgive him, whether they might someday build a different kind of family together. But for the first time, Blake was okay with that uncertainty. Because he had finally learned what his mother had tried to teach him all along, what Eliza had embodied in every aspect of her life. That love isn't about what someone can give you or how they fit into your plans. It's about seeing someone fully, valuing them completely, and choosing them again and again, even when life doesn't follow the path you expected. True love, true family, isn't found in perfect circumstances or fulfilled expectations. It's built in the imperfect moments, the challenges overcome together, the recognition that each person's worth transcends their ability or inability to be what others want them to be. And sometimes, if you're lucky enough to learn that lesson before it's too late, you get a second chance to build something real. Something that might not look like what you once thought you wanted, but that fills your heart in ways you never imagined possible. If this story has touched you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share. Remember that true love isn't about finding someone perfect, but about seeing someone's perfect worth beyond any limitations or expectations. Thank you for watching.